a comparative study of memorization and contextual application method. So, to begin with, I want to give an outline, which is the background, starting off with the background, problem statement, scope, rationale, research questions, research objectives, literature review, methodology, limitations, data analysis, and finally the conclusion. So first, let's talk about the introduction in terms of its background. So as we all know, vocabulary is a core component in language proficiency, and it forms a foundation for effective communication across all four skills in language, which is writing, reading, speaking, and listening. Despite 13 to 14 years of learning English in the Sri Lankan curriculum, there is no significant improvement seen in the students. So, the secondary education curriculum is mainly determined by a standard exam-oriented system, which could be a major reason for this gap which is observed. So, according to the Lankan 2014, teaching methodologies are not modern, innovative, and the current assessment systems systems are not adaptable, and mainly it relies on examination that depends on just memorizing only for the exam, which is quite passive learning. And also, according to Mahmood 2006, lack of teacher training in pedagogies, time limitations, and the lack of resources could be a major reason why contextual methods are barely used in the curriculum framework. Moving on to the problem statement. So vocabulary is considered to be a vital aspect in language learning, especially in Sri Lanka, where memorization dominates the traditional method. So, and also the secondary students face challenges in retaining vocabulary in the long term and applying it contextually. And also, this heavy reliance on rote memorization is considered to be one of the main barriers. Even though it works well in short term, it does not promote a long-term retention or ability to apply in real-world meaningful context, according to U 2011. Also, this disparity in vocabulary retention impacts the students' communication fluency and also the exam performance, ultimately impeding the overall language development. This necessitates the implementation of more effective, innovative, and empirical methods to vocabulary learning that involves using vocabulary in meaningful contexts to address the issue which has been prevalent so far. So, moving on to the scope of my study, the focus will be on grade 10 to 11 students following the national curriculum in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and the study explores two teaching methodologies, which is the memorization and the contextual application method in the form of storytelling, and the study aims to offer implementable solutions which are specifically relevant to the Sri Lankan secondary education. Moving on to the rationale. So, to begin with the study of Strong 2023, the adaptability to retain and competently use vocabulary is imperative as English functions as a second language and provides access to global opportunities. So this is why English is considered to be a more important aspect in all of it, be it academic, trade, or the professional development. So this study brings a novel dimension to understand the manner in which contextual method can enhance long-term retention by emphasizing on storytelling. And according to R. Eric, Landrum, Brake, and McCarthy 2019, the study can guide, the storytelling is considered to be, according to them, the storytelling is considered to be a pedagogical tool. So thus the study can guide the policymakers by emphasizing storytelling to give priority on context-based learning in English language instructions. Further, this study will result in developing effective and interactive learning environment, providing learners with the enduring language skills important for their academic and professional lives. Moving on to the research questions. So the study is basically addressing 4 questions, which is what is the most effective method for vocabulary retention out of memorization and contextual application method among Sri Lankan secondary level students. Second, what are the impacts of memorization on vocabulary retention among Sri Lankan secondary students? Third, what are the effects of contextual application method in enhancing vocabulary retention? Fourth, what are the students' perceptions and preferences for memorization versus contextual application methods in vocabulary learning? Moving on to research objectives. So to come, the first would be the main objective of this research is to compare the effectiveness of memorization and contextual application method on vocabulary retention among Sri Lankan secondary school students. Secondly, to evaluate the impact of memorization method on students' vocabulary retention and to assess the effectiveness of contextual application method in enhancing vocabulary retention. Finally, to identify the students' perceptions and preferences for memorization versus contextual application methods in vocabulary learning. Moving on to the limitations of my study. Since the sample is comprised only the Colombo-10 area, this may affect the generalizability because the area is only Colombo-10. And big and urban area, the resource availability is comparatively high. Hence, this findings show a lack of generalizability to rural areas. And a major limitation of this study is the time constraints. And the study is done, the cross-sectional nature of the study will affect the long-term retention effects. And the time constraint also limits the sample size of the study. So moving on to the theoretical framework. So the study is backed by three theories, which is the depth of processing hypothesis of Craig and Lockhart 1972, and the input process hypothesis of Crescent 1995, and the cognitive development theory of Jean Piaget. So first, when you look into the depth of processing hypothesis, it states that the learners would have a deeper processing will be involved when they engage in learning, which requires more challenge and which has more meaningful context. So when you take a look at my study, it has more of a contextual using storytelling. There's more context and more cognitive involvement. And in this study, it says that more memory traces would be created in our mental lexicon if there's more cognitive load. So my study, where I focus on storytelling, it enhances, it incorporates more involvement in the meaningful context, thereby it would result in long-term retention. The second theory, which is Crescent's input process hypothesis, according to Crescent, he says that natural language acquisition occurs when the students are acquire the input which is slightly higher than the existing knowledge, which is termed as I+1. So when you give the students with stories, they come across vocabulary which is pertaining to their current knowledge and slightly above their current level. So this would result in more natural acquisition of language rather than memorization, which is quite impractical and not realistic to learn, and it won't have any long-term impact. Moving on to the last theory, which is the Jean Piaget's cognitive development theory. Since I'm focusing on secondary level students, they are under the age group of formal operational stage where children prefer to learn through analytical thinking and then logical reasoning, and also they prefer learning by involving, they prefer active learning. So when you take storytelling, it provides, the children gets immersed with the learning, and it's kind of an active learning that happens in the process of learning the vocabulary through stories. And also he states that the children simulate schemas, and then when they acquire new information, and they accommodate when they acquire something which is new. So similarly, what happens in stories is that the children will acquire the context in the stories would help them to accommodate their existing schemas, but it doesn't occur in memorization method. And further, he also states that in his this particular theory, he states that children try to build an equilibrium when they come across challenges in their learning, which would result in long-term retention. So in storytelling, what happens is that when they come across with challenging words, new words, they don't give up. They try to somehow create the they somehow try to maintain the equilibrium, which would result in long-term retention. And yeah, so moving on to the literature review, based on the existing studies. So the first study is that which is done on memorization as a strategy for vocabulary retention for undergraduate students by Lankan 2012. He has found out that the memorization is, if memorization is paired with vocabulary quizzes, it can only facilitate short-term retention, right? And another study which is done by Yang and Day on rote memorization of vocabulary and vocabulary development, he suggests that the rote memorization can serve as a useful tool for initial vocabulary acquisition, not for later on, for the foundation. So this should, where educators should include more dynamic methods to promote deeper understanding and retention among students when they move along the journey of learning language. These two, when you take a look at these two studies, which is on rote memorization, it limits only to one methodology, which is memorization, and they overlook about other contextual methods as in storytelling and role play. So there is a gap in this study which will be addressed by this the study which I am conducting. And the second is that it's about oral and visual storytelling retention among Iranian EFL learners by Amin Afshar and Moja Zevi. So this states that visual and oral storytelling makes listeners to actively engage with their personal experience, and this emotional engagement in learning positively impact long-term retention of vocabulary. So and another study on storytelling and role play on young learners by Ozdemir 2015 states he has proven that storytelling as a pedagogical tool in language in education is a powerful technique that enhances learners' comprehension by providing a rich context for vocabulary acquisition, which also lacks comparative analysis on another method, which is like the traditional method, which is memorization. So there is a gap in this which will be addressed from my study, and also it is basically not in the Sri Lankan context, it is in the Western region. So this last study, which has a comparative, study on the effectiveness of using rote memorization and storytelling as a contextual method, which is done on EFL, which is done in Turkey by Mediha and Enisa, focusing EFL classrooms in grade 9. But here what we see is that this has been this study has not been conducted in Sri Lanka, and this study doesn't go in depth into storytelling. So mainly it is like when you come across, when you take a look at the gap, most of the researchers which has been done is not in Sri Lankan context, and there is no many researchers have not done comparative research with memorization and contextual application. So so my study will be basically focusing on storytelling as a single contextual application method against memorization, fostering long-term retention, and a practical application in certain level students specifically following the GCE O level. Moving on to the methodology. So my methodology is basically has followed the research onion design of Sounders 2019. When it comes to the layers of the research onion, the philosophy is the pragmatism is used here, which is a mix of both observations and existing theories. The approach is both inductive and deductive approach. Strategy is the strategy that I have used here is that I use the teaching, the interventions, and even the questionnaires are being used for data collections, as well as the case study has been conducted in order to get the qualitative data. The choice is is mixed because it incorporates both qualitative and quantitative data. The time horizon is cross-sectional because the observations and data is gathered only one time. And the techniques and the procedures is that the data is collected through a structured questionnaire, intervention, and it is analyzed using the statistical software, which is SPSS. The methodology in terms of its population is that the target population is secondary level grade 10 and 11 students following the national curriculum in Colombo 10. The sample size is 50, and the data collection procedure is that I had a pre-test, post-test, questionnaire and an interview. And the data analysis is done to SPSS software for pair teachers and correlation analysis. And the case study is conducted to analyze the interview. And moving on to the data analysis, to begin with the data analysis, first the data analysis, the first step of the data analysis was to conduct a reliability statistic test, where mainly we use we get the COBAE alpha value, which helps us to, the reliability statistic test is mainly done to find out the internal consistency of the data gathered, especially mainly the questionnaire. We are focusing here about the questionnaire. So when the COBAE alpha value is 0.923, so the standard value should be 0.7. If it is more than 0.7, which is 0.923, which is a excellent value, it shows that the data is the internal consistency of the data is high, greatly high. So moving on to the ANOVA table, which is the next stage. Once we find out that our data, our questionnaire has a good internal consistency, the next step is to do the ANOVA table of reliability. So in the ANOVA table, the main values that we focus on is the significance value. So as you could see, the significance value is 0.000, where we expect the significance value has to be less than 0.05. So you can see it's less than 0.05. So therefore the internal the data is statistically significant. So based on the previous table and this statistics, we could say that the internal consistency is excellent, and the reliability of the research tool is has provided expect credible results. And another value that we focus on is the grand mean value, so which is 3.91. So this implies that most of the response in the questionnaire is inclined more towards the agree in the Lankan scale, which is favorable for my study. And the next is at the higher F value. So F value has to be usually more than 1, which says 22.183, which is excellent value, which shows that the data is statistically significant and reliable. The next step is to check whether the data is normally distributed. So for that we I conducted a normality test. So in the normality test, when you consider the Kolmogorov-Smirnov and Shaprov test, each variable under the significance value shows a value which is greater than 0.05, which we accept, which we say it's really good. So the significance value has to be greater in contrast to the previous table. So you can see all the values are 0.64, 0.57, 0.68, greater than 0.05. So we can reject the null hypothesis, the alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis of this research is that the data is not normally distributed. So that means we can reject it. It is normally distributed, so we can reject the alternative hypothesis of this table. And this implies the possible normal distribution of the data as a result. Moving on to the next test, which is the Q plot that we have plotted on each variable. So the Q plot, once we do the normal test, we move on to the Q plot, where we could visually represent the normal distribution. So it is done for all the variables, including the independent and the dependent variables. So the first independent variable memorization, you could say all the points, most of the points lie on the line, and there's slight deviation which we could ignore, and so it's completely, we can say that it's all the points on the along the diagonal line. So we can say that the data is normally distributed. Moving on to the next one, the vocabulary tension, which is a dependent variable in our study. So here also the values are along the diagonal, but there's slight deviation, but still it goes in the same direction. So we could say that the data is normally distributed. And we could go further, we could move on with further analysis. Moving on to storytelling, it is the same as before. All the values are along the diagonal line, so we could say that the data is normally distributed, and we can impact suitability of the independent variable for further analysis. And we next do a group statistic where we do an independent sample test. This is because we have two groups, which is the experimental group and the control group. The control group is the group 2 and the experimental group is the group 1. So where we, the experiment group, which is group 1, we teach them with storytelling, and the group 2 control, which we teach them using the memorization method. So since the students are separated, there are two different groups, sets of students, we do this group statistic independent sample test. So from this we basically check the effectiveness of the test, the pre-test and the post. So as you can see, the average gain score of the storytelling is 15.80, and the standard deviation is 10.70. This shows standard deviation means it shows the spread of the data. So as you could see, the group 1 has scored a higher mean score compared to the group 2, which is the memorization group, where the mean is 14.0. But the standard deviation is quite a little slightly higher than the storytelling, but that doesn't matter. We have to check the mean score. So mean score, you can say, is drastic change, so that we can say that storytelling has a more impact on vocabulary retention than the memorization group. So we can say that storytelling is more effective than memorization. Moving on to the next, which is the independent sample test. So here we see the Leibniz equality variation. So as you could see, the significance value is 0.361, which is greater than 0.05. So when you get a significance value which is greater than 0.05, you can say that the variances between the two groups are assumed to be equal. And which means, in other words, it's the flow of the scores that they have got. It's almost, they are equal. When it comes to t-test and the significance, the t-value and the p-value, you could say that it is the value is 0.000. So we can say that our data is statistically significant once again. And when you consider both the tables of independent sample t-test and this, which is an independent samples test, where you have a more gain score, we could say that the data is statistically significant, and we have we can say that storytelling is more effective than memorization. Moving on to the correlation. So in the correlation analysis, what we do is the purpose of doing the correlation analysis is to see what kind of relationship each variable has with the dependent variable. So here we consider the Pearson correlation coefficient. So when it comes to vocabulary retention, it is 0.621, which is a positive value. So when you take the memorization is 0.621, which is a positive relationship with the dependent variable, but it is moderately, the relationship is not strong, it's moderate. So at the initial step of the study, since we have developed hypotheses, the hypothesis what we developed was there is no relation. The null hypothesis was there is no relationship between memorization and contextual application, and the alternative hypothesis that there is a relationship between memorization and vocabulary retention. So based on this score, we can say that there is a relationship between memorization and contextual application. Therefore, we can reject the null hypothesis. And if you take the significance value with 0.000, which is less than 0.05, so we can further affirm that the data is statistically significant, and we can reject the null hypothesis. Moving on to the next table, which illustrates the relationship between storytelling and vocabulary retention. As you could see, the Pearson correlation of storytelling is 0.893, which is a positive as well as a strong. It shows a strong relationship between the two variables, which is storytelling and vocabulary retention. So it exhibits a strong positive relationship. So based on this, and next is the significance value, same as before, it is less than 0.05, which is 0.000. So the data is statistically significant. So based on this significance value and the Pearson correlation coefficient, we can reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis, which says that the storytelling has a more impact and an effective, positive, strong relationship with vocabulary retention. So next case study, as I told before, it was done to gather the qualitative data. So based on this transcript, a thematic analysis was conducted, and from that we have got four themes, which is engagement, where the codes would be emotional investments and immersion, effectiveness, the second theme, retention, recall, practical application, and the barriers or the facilitators were overload and repetition. Themes are the teaching methods, effectiveness of the traditional method. So what I observed in the case study under the engagement is that there were certain students say that the characters of the story makes the words alive. That means they have an emotional engagement with the story and they get immersed in the story. In contrast, in memorization, when you take, most students they say that it was boring and mechanical. And they use it, they get a list of words or list of things to just study for the sake of studying for the examination. So it's not a realistic, more practical way of learning. Moving on to the effectiveness, there were children who stated that they felt that they get connected emotionally with the characters and they relate the words with their own experiences. So which results in better retention. But in memorization, it's not effective because they struggle to recall, because they don't, and also they along with recalling, they also find it difficult to recall the words and apply it in real life. And the next is the facilitators and the barriers. In storytelling, having new words and emotional connection with those help the students to remember the words. But in memorization, there was no such facilitation. It was just they had barriers because there was no context, and they had difficulties to memorize. That was the main. The memorizing a whole list of words was quite challenging for them, which was the main barrier. Teaching methods, when you see in storytelling, students prefer storytelling and they criticize the list-based method, which is usually followed in schools. So moving on to memorization, students did not like the traditional method of memorization and giving dictation, so which they felt it challenging and not useful. The conclusion of the study in terms of the relationship between the variables, it was that the memorization and storytelling were the independent variables, and vocabulary retention was the dependent variable. So using the correlation analysis, we were able to prove that storytelling had a positive, strong relationship with the vocabulary retention compared to the memorization method, which was a moderate relationship. And in terms of the most effective method for vocabulary retention, we conducted the independent sample test. From that, storytelling was found as the most effective method for vocabulary retention in secondary students, and even the case study proved that through the insights of the story of the students, that storytelling students prefer storytelling over memorization. And the test statistically has proven the difference between both methods, and storytelling had the highest mean, confirming that it is the highest or the effective method for vocabulary retention. And when we take a look at the objective achievement, the first objective was achieved by conducting the independent sample tests, finding that storytelling is more effective than vocabulary retention. The second and the third objective, which asked how the memorization and storytelling is impactful, the impact of those two variables on vocabulary retention. So from that we were able to achieve their objective by running the correlation analysis, which stated that the relationship between memorization and vocabulary retention is not stronger in comparison to storytelling and vocabulary retention. And the fourth objective, which is about the insights and the perceptions of the students on both methods. From the case, it was able to prove through the case study that the students resulted in long-term retention compared to memorization, which actually gives them short-term vocabulary retention. And the next is that the study statistically confirmed the effectiveness of storytelling on vocabulary retention when comparison to memorization, and the story-based lessons enable the students to build imaginations. Through the imagination, the real meaning of new words can be stored in their mind, resulting in long-term, rather than trying to store the words just as a word. And the memory and the mental process is always connected with the cognitive skills. And therefore, the study needs more in-depth analysis considering cognitive theories and other related motivational theories. Based on the cognitive theories, retention is affected by amount of mental process or cognitive load that imposed on students during the learning experience, according to Ginting et al. 2024. And according to Basilova, the mental process happens in the brain when storytelling is complex. Even the eagerness to learn through stories is always encouraging, which leads to long-term retention. Moving to the suggestions, the study provides a 5-main suggestion, which is that teachers can integrate storytelling into daily lessons, and they can create storytelling-based assessments, which would motivate students to engage in the lesson, and organize the storytelling competitions, promoting peer learning and evaluating long-term retention. The implication for the future researchers would be you can incorporate storytelling methods in the education system, could include from the lower grades, and also this study could expand to complex storytelling method in vocabulary retention in government schools and international schools in Sri Lanka. And also the findings of the studies should be used to improve the current system, and this research study can be extended by comparing digital storytelling and interactive storytelling on vocabulary retention. Finally, the storytelling methods also can be tested to compare both short-term and long-term vocabulary, because there are so many storytelling methods under this particular contextual application method. And this is the reference list, and that's all about my presentation.